Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I get off the train and deliver a show to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver. What a lovely day it is today, February 26th, and it feels like spring here in suburban Chicago. The sun is shining. I'm not wearing a jacket. I do have a winter cap on for a little extra warmth, but I don't know if I need it. It's lovely. I'm not using my usual microphone today, so if things sound a little different, that's why. Hopefully it still sounds acceptable. I guess if it doesn't, I won't release this recording, and you won't know that it never sounded acceptable. There's a plane flying overhead. There's leaves on the ground. It's a lovely day. Well, today I thought I would talk about the idea of being surprised when you play a game. I don't mean being surprised like a jump scare in a movie, or like the big move when in Game of Thrones when your opponent suddenly turns on you and all your planning has gone for naught. No, instead I'm talking more about the idea of understanding what a game is going to be and not being ready for it to be what it ends up being. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but I will try to get to it. So I think surprise is more common as disappointment. That, especially with games, like video games, I remember this a lot when I was a kid and we didn't have the internet to do reviews. But this happens with movies as well. Something where you really like the look of a thing, and then when you get it and you try it, it just isn't what you were hoping it would be. And the feeling is obviously disappointment. No, it's not uncommon to think of that feeling as surprise. That feeling is obviously disappointment. Now that kind of disappointment is a surprise, hopefully, in that you didn't expect to be disappointed by a text, by a game or a movie or whatever. Although sometimes that's expected. If you have a movie that you're interested in and it has really crummy reviews, and you go see it anyway, often you're not surprised by it being crummy. In my experience, though, I'm not disappointed either. I've seen a number of movies where the reviews told me it probably wouldn't be any good, and then when I saw it and it was just pretty mediocre, I ended up enjoying it quite a bit because I thought it was going to be terrible. I haven't really had that happen so much with board games, although I guess I can think of one example. One game I was really excited for this year was Shark Island. It's a new Richard Launius game from Mayday Games. And the premise is basically Jaws, the board game. It's not called Jaws, the board game, but the idea is there's a shark menacing an Atlantic Ocean resort island, and you have to try to stop the shark. Now the game, it's a goofy game, really strange. The shark picks a motivation at the beginning, and the shark's motivation is either to get resorts to close, or get the mayor fired, or raise the overall terror level of the whole village. There's one more, but I can't quite remember what the other, close the beaches, I think. But these are really silly. I mean, right? A shark doesn't have motivation at all. The shark also gets like these coins to spend, and the game's mechanism is blackjack. So it is a goofy game. But I could see if you didn't know anything about the game, you just saw the cover and you read the back and you saw it was like a Jaws themed game, and you bought it and you got it home, I could see being very disappointed in the game. You'd say, why are we playing blackjack, and why does the shark have coins, and care who the mayor is? It would be a strange game to buy if you didn't know what it was coming in. Now, I read the reviews and I heard what it was, and so I knew what it was going in, and when I've introduced it to people, I introduce it as this sort of goofy, ridiculous play of this idea that's all about theme and has this silly mechanism. So in that's a way that I've sort of avoided disappointment in a surprise. Another place I think that people are sometimes surprised is with Kickstarter. This is the long reputation of Kickstarter is that the games are overproduced and under play tested. that a game you get on Kickstarter, the art looks really nice, and so you back it, or you like the idea of the theme, and then when you get the game, it isn't very good. Either there's a lot of flaws in the rule book, or it hasn't been properly play tested, or it's broken, or all three, or perhaps it doesn't deliver, or delivers really, really late, and by then your enthusiasm for it has dwindled. So Kickstarter is another place where a lot of games end up disappointing in their surprise. Now you can also have it go the other way. You have a game you expected to not like end up surprising you with its quality. I've had this happen a few times, or games that I thought, yeah, I'll probably like that, but then I end up really liking it. Brass was that way. The first time I played Brass, it just blew my mind. I thought I would probably like it, and I picked it up because it was on sale. But then when I played it, I loved the way it worked, and I loved the feeling. That was that feeling I did in episode 1 of Not Enough, maybe episode 2, of not having quite enough. It was excellent. So Brass was a game that surprised me that way. But I thought of this episode topic, and I wanted to talk about it today because I was surprised by a game this weekend, and I wanted to talk about the feeling of it and the experience of that. So this previous weekend, the 24th and 25th of February, I helped officiate a swim meet in suburban Illinois, or suburban Chicago, in the outer suburbs south of the city. It was the regional swim meet. And on our way home, my wife spotted a game store and suggested we stop. Now that is a rarity in our family. Usually I'm the one who wants to stop, and she's cautioning restraint. But this time around it worked out the other way. So we went in, and it was a nice little store. Oh, I feel bad that I don't remember the name of it. But we looked around a bit, and I saw there were quite a few games that I'd seen before, and a couple that I was interested in. They had Mountains of Madness, for instance, but nothing that was thrilling me enough to pay full retail price, which is, it's a local game store. It probably is operating at full retail price. And then my wife spots Grim Forest, or The Grim Forest. Now, the one she spotted was not the one I'd seen pictures of on Board Game Geek. It had a red cover, and it looked like a book. It was called The Grim Forest, and there wasn't much detail on it. But I had certainly seen conversation about it on Board Game Geek, and I knew it was something people were excited about, and it was interesting. Then I went and looked it up, and I hadn't really researched it much before, but it had a 7.8 rating, which is very high. If you don't know your Board Game Geek numbers, that is really high. Now, I've since discovered that it was really high because it was a Kickstarter game, and a lot of people rated it based on Kickstarter, and it's only just in the last month or so actually been showing up at people's houses. So it's hard to say where that rating will actually end up if we give the game another few months to be played and rated by people. So anyway, that said, but like I said, it was highly rated. It looked interesting. It wasn't too expensive. And so my wife said, why don't we get it? So we did. It turned out we were getting the Kickstarter edition, which is nice. It had an extra card in it and a box sleeve. That's the red box I was talking about. Once we got it opened up, you could see the more traditional fairy tale art on the cover. But then I got out the rule book, and I have to say, I was a bit nervous. Now, I briefly read the description, but we were in a game store that we didn't want to take too long. So I hadn't read a ton on the Board Game Geek page. I saw that there was some resource management. So I knew it wasn't an adventure game, but I guess I thought it would be kind of adventure-y. Well, if you haven't played it, the theme is very light. Lightly applied to what's going on in the game. The premise of the game is that you are one of the nephews or nieces of the three little pigs, and the king is looking for a new official builder to help develop the forest. One person on the forums said it was sort of like working for King Farquaad in the Shrek series, that he's evil and he wants to develop the enchanted forest by knocking it down. But so each player plays one of these little pigs, and what you do in the game is you go gather resources, either from the brickyard, the forest, the fields, or the market, and then you use those resources to build houses. And the goal of the game is to build 3 houses. You buy a floor, you buy walls, and you buy a roof. The first player to build 3 houses triggers the end of the game, and at the end of that round, in which someone built their 3rd house, then the end of the game is triggered, and the player with the most sturdy houses wins. So the mechanism by which you do the gathering is pretty interesting. You pick where you want to go gather your resources at the beginning, and then everyone reveals where they're going, and if more than one person went to the same place, they divide up the resources that are available there. If you went there by yourself, you get everything that's there. If no one went there, then there's more resources available the next round. It's a pretty simple mechanism, and frankly, after reading the instructions, I was very nervous that we had just bought a large box with beautiful components. I forgot to mention, components in this game are beautiful. Each player marker is an individually sculpted pig. There's wolves, there's other fairy tale creatures, each of the houses are these little plastic molded houses. So the wooden house looks different than the brick house, which looks different than the straw house. It is beautiful, but it is sort of the definition of overproduced. A lot of this stuff could just be cardboard tokens and the game would work just fine. The box could be half the size it was and it would work just fine. It is elaborate and gigantic, and the insert is really nice. It is super fancy. But I was really worried that it was a super fancy package for a game that was way, way too light for my taste. That we would play it once and kind of go, oh boy, what a stinker. That was my thought after reading the rulebook. Now, the one place that the rulebook that I couldn't predict was that on your turn, one of the actions you could take is to take a Fable card, which are these cards that let you do special things. And then each turn you're allowed to play one of these cards right before you gather. Little did I know. So we went to play this game, and I explained it, and we started playing it, and I was a little worried. I didn't say that I was worried, but I was a little worried it wasn't going to be good. And we start drawing these Fable cards, and suddenly I discover that the whole dynamic of the game, the whole interesting part of the game is in these Fable cards. Because all of the Fable cards enable a ton of interaction with players. They allow you to steal resources from other players. They allow you to move people around. They allow you to discard resources from the board. They create all of this interaction that wouldn't normally be there in a pretty simple worker placement game. And they provide tension because, the game's whole point is just to get enough resources to build 3 of these houses. Well, that doesn't take very long. You can build... I had turns where I was building 2 house sections in the same turn. That would be followed, of course, or have been preceded, of course, by 1 or 2 turns where I didn't do anything, but in terms of building. But, I think our whole game took maybe 15 turns at the most. And you're building 9 house pieces in that time. Maybe more. So it was a relatively quick game when we played it. But I found that the depth of play was surprisingly good. That the variety of Fable cards allows for a lot of different interactions. That the friends give you a variety of different things you can do. And when you get a new friend, you can then foist that new friend you drew off on another player. So if they've gotten a really powerful friend or they're using it to good effect, you can actually get rid of that friend by giving them another one, and then they lose the friend they had and they take this other one you drew instead. It's really compelling. So the nice experience for me was that not only was the game a really nice package, but it turned out the game itself was really a pretty strong filler. I'll call it a filler, not as a pejorative, but in terms of time. I think of a game that takes between a half an hour and 45 minutes as a filler. It's a game that fills in the time between other bigger games. That my ideal game time is 90 minutes or so. So a game that comes in under an hour is generally going to be a filler for me, unless it's super intense. I guess I don't think of Pandemic as a filler, and that usually takes about an hour, but it can take longer. But so this game, in terms of weight, feels like a filler to me, or length. But there's a lot of interaction going on in ways that make it really compelling, and I'm excited to play it again, and I suspect it'll stay around in our collection because it looks really nice, so it'll be easy to get people who don't play much into the game. But it also has a surprising amount of interaction and depth with these cards that allow you to pursue a variety of different tactics. Now, having only played once, I can't yet comment on its strategic value, on your ability to plan long-term, because there are so many cards that mess with your low-scale actions. It reminds me a little bit of Tash Kalar in that way, I mentioned Tashklar is the Vlada Shavato game from Czech Games Edition that involves placing these tiles out on the board, and when you play a card, you change the tiles around on the board, and you often mess up the other player's move. This game has similar things. You're stealing people's resources, and if they had just used a turn to get up to the number they needed to buy a wall, say, then when you steal one, you undo their plans for their next turn. That sort of thing is particularly strong in the Grim Forest. But all that said, I found it really lovely and surprising. So while I wouldn't call this a review of the Grim Forest, I will use it as an extended example of a game that provided a delightful surprise despite the simplicity of its initial presentation. Well, I hope you found that interesting and edifying. Please reach out to me, Brendan at rattleboxgames.com, or on Twitter at rattleboxgames. You can find show notes at rattleboxgames.com, where I put up links to pages about the episode and so on. That's it for me today on Pick Up and Deliver. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.